Next presentation is by Sophie Albanis, and the title is The Chieftain's Weary Daughter, The Feminist Legacy and Mainstream Appropriation of Sarah Winnemucca.
Hi everybody, my name is Sophie Albanis, and my research project is titled The Chieftain's Weary Daughter, The Feminist Legacy and Mainstream Appropriation of Sarah Winnemucca. As a women's and gender studies major, I tend to analyze everything through a very specific critical lens, one that seeks out and focuses on the gendered implications of quite literally anything and everything. So when I became part of the Northern Paiute History Project, and when it came time to choose a topic for my research project, I knew that I wanted to focus in some way on women. And as I began my preliminary research, one name kept popping up, and it was Sarah Winnemucca. Like many of you, I was not taught the history of Oregon's Native American communities when I was in school. I was not taught that the United States Army staged a genocide in the truest definition of the word in this state, and I was not taught that this history includes one of the most controversial and contentious Indigenous women not only in Oregon's past, but in that of the United States. So I decided to study her. And I had never heard of Sarah Winnemucca before I began my research, but I quickly learned that she was a woman of many talents and identities. To begin with, Sarah was a member of the Northern Paiute, a community that has inhabited the Great Basin regions of Nevada, Oregon, California, and Idaho for thousands of years. In fact, Sarah was the granddaughter of Truckee, a famous Paiute leader known for his diplomatic and amicable dealings with white settlers. Sarah's place of privilege within the Paiute community later gave her the opportunity to be educated in white schools and to serve as an interpreter and school teacher on several Native American reservations. And when the Paiutes fled the conflict-ridden Malheur Reservation and joined the Bannock people in resisting the encroaching white settlers, it was Sarah who elected to serve the United States Army as an interpreter and guide during the Bannock-Paiute War of 1878. Over the course of this 30-day conflict, Sarah assisted the Army in locating and rounding up a number of Paiute bands, which she referred to as small parties of hostiles. The result of these roundups was the Army's order to remove the Paiute people to the Yakima Reservation in southern Washington, often regarded as the Paiute's very own Trail of Tears, a 350-mile trek through knee-deep snow, forcefully evacuating the tribe from their ancestral homeland. And so, in the perception of many, if not all, Northern Paiute people, Sarah Winnemucca is an unforgivable and undeniable traitor. But following her service to the Army, Sarah turned over a new leaf. She became a staunch advocate for Native American rights and sovereignty. She lectured in San Francisco, Boston, and Washington, D.C., testified before Congress, met with President Rutherford B. Hayes twice, and in 1883 became the first Native American woman to publish a book. So to say the least, Sarah Winnemucca was controversial, and perhaps one of the greatest reasons for her contentious legacy is the fact that she was not only a traitor, she was a woman. I knew that I could never uncover the real motivations for Sarah's involvement with the Army. Others have tried to do so and failed. So I decided that my project would be historiographical. It would examine the history that has been written and not written about Sarah Winnemucca. And as I read biographies and essays and newspaper articles, I began to notice something that I believe to be very significant, that white women and Native women, particularly Northern Paiute women, understand Sarah Winnemucca in very different ways. At the center of my study on Sarah Winnemucca was intersectionality, which we talk about a lot in the field of women's and gender studies. The theory of intersectionality holds that social identities like gender, race, class, etc., and systems of oppression like sexism, racism, capitalism, etc., are overlapping and inseparable from one another. Our identities interact with each other on multiple and simultaneous levels, producing unique experiences of privilege and oppression for each individual. I believe that what makes Sarah Winnemucca so legendary is her plurality, her existence at the intersections of settler society and the Paiute community, of the cherished past and the imminent, seemingly unstoppable future. She was a mediator between white colonialism and the indigenous community, between the public realm and her traditional heritage, and between political assertiveness and conventional forms of femininity. But it seemed to me that this complexity was entirely absent from white-authored accounts of Sarah Winnemucca. In mainstream culture, we see Sarah portrayed as a heroine, an Indian princess in the tradition of Sacagawea and Pocahontas. Sarah Winnemucca, as she appears between the pages of white-authored biographies, is a strong, independent woman, the eloquent voice of the Paiutes, and a paradigm of resistance to American Indian assimilation. But this is not exclusive to contemporary accounts. Sarah Winnemucca's own autobiography, Life Among the Paiutes, Their Wrongs and Claims, was hardly free of white women's influences. In 1883, when Sarah became the first Native American woman to publish an autobiography, it was under the counsel and supervision of Mary Peabody Mann, a white feminist and social reformer who would serve in the coming years as Sarah's editor and agent of sorts. The power dynamics between author and editor are often fraught with conflicts of authority and autonomy. To make matters even more complicated, Sarah and Mary's collaboration also embodied the contact between Native cultures and settler society, the colonized and the colonizer. To be sure, it was not Sarah's advocacy on behalf of Native peoples that made her so attractive to Peabody and to the white reformers who filled auditoriums to listen to the Paiute princess speak. Though Sarah came from a Native background and promoted fair treatment of her people, she was also a sponsor of women's rights, and it seems quite evident that this was what the white first-wave feminists valued. In Life Among the Paiutes, Sarah writes, "The Paiutes' council tent is our Congress, and anybody can speak who has anything to say, women and all. If women could go into your Congress, I think justice would soon be done to the Indians." How fitting that a Native American autobiography, edited by one of the nation's premier social reformers, should coincidentally contain testimony advocating for white women's advancement in American society. The fact that Peabody sent copies of the manuscript to influential politicians only further suggests that her support of Sarah's platform was more self-serving than it was charitable. Similarly, most modern narratives on Sarah Winnemucca reflect the unspoken notion that her career as an activist and lecturer are only worth acknowledgement because of their contribution to mainstream modes of feminism. Sally Springmeyer Zanjani and Gay Whitney Canfield are the white authors of the two most famous biographies on Sarah Winnemucca, each unique in their treatment of Sarah's womanhood. In her preface to Sarah Winnemucca of the Northern Paiutes, Canfield describes Sarah as a strong woman determined to succeed for her cause while essentially alone in a man's world. It is significant that Canfield first identifies Sarah as a woman rather than a Native woman, and indeed this is representative of white feminist tendency to ignore issues of race when evaluating the contributions of non-white women. Canfield's delineation of a man's world is indicative of a similar colorblindness. As a Native woman, Sarah was alone not only in a man's world, but in a white man's world, which would have made her experience all the more challenging. Sarah Winnemucca by Zanjani is undoubtedly the more white-centric biography of the two. Zanjani overzealously romanticizes Sarah's life in passages like, "Her bravery in the face of great danger and her epic rides for long distances over harsh terrain are the stuff of Western legend. She served peace as vigorously as she rode her galloping horse across the desert with a general's message." To a white biographer such as Zanjani, it is easy to overlook, if not ignore, the drastic consequences of Sarah's involvement with the army. Indeed, what makes Zanjani's book so contentious is its outright denial that Sarah ever betrayed her people, an allegation that Zanjani describes as difficult to sustain in close study of the Bannock War. Zanjani's stance is particularly perplexing because it readily disregards the wealth of information, including documents enclosed in the appendix of Life Among the Paiutes, that testify to Sarah's full and voluntary involvement in the Army's efforts. In their own insidious way, these selective histories are a form of modern colonization. They hijack the narratives of Native people and reappropriate them for an unrelated and self-serving purpose. Including the voices of Native feminists in the ongoing scrutiny of Sarah as an Indigenous woman and thinker is necessary, both in understanding the real implications of her actions and in doing justice to the history and perspectives of the Northern Paiute. The narrative of betrayal, abandonment, and assimilation is almost entirely absent from the mainstream literature on Sarah Winnemucca, yet it is enduringly prevalent in the modern-day sentiments of the Northern Paiute, like Myra Johnson Orange, who I interviewed for this project. To a white onlooker, this discrepancy in perception might constitute little more than an interesting historical detail. From a social justice perspective, however, the implications are as real as they are harmful. When we apply mainstream definitions of feminism to a Native woman, we effectively erase any opportunity to understand the effects of colonialism on the female experience. Although Sarah interacted regularly and comfortably with white people from an early age, her Native ancestry is not interchangeable with her womanhood. White feminists cannot pick and choose the aspects of Sarah's identity that they wish to take into consideration. Her ability to communicate effectively with white society does not make her a part of it. In fact, she wrote in Life Among the Paiutes, "We do not want to have white people near us, we do not want to go where they are, and we do not want them to come near us." We must commit to recognizing these white reimaginings of Native women as exactly what they are, cultural appropriation. If examining Sarah through a decolonized lens means acknowledging the fact that she betrayed her people, so be it. So as a white feminist writing a critical analysis on other white feminists, it seems only necessary that I acknowledge that my own perspective is by no means the be-all and end-all of scholarship on Sarah Winnemucca. If anything, this project aims to portray Sarah as a highly complex, controversial figure about whom little is agreed upon, and whose story white feminists have routinely appropriated in order to advance their own political agendas. The case of Sarah Winnemucca, I'm almost done. Can I just, okay. The case of Sarah Winnemucca demonstrates the desperate need for Native voices to be the primary voices where narratives of assimilation and resistance are concerned. It is not hard to imagine why such a large body of work concerning Sarah Winnemucca exists today. She is something of an enigma, but as is the case with many enigmatic figures, her story is a difficult one to tell. She was Native, female, radical, bicultural, and military. Though Sarah Winnemucca betrayed her people at a great and irrevocable cost, the summation of these influences on her life resulted in her development as a highly intersectional figure through which post-colonial theories of feminism become both evident and contentious. Simply put, Sarah Winnemucca was of two worlds, and perhaps sadly at home in neither. Thank you. Okay. Anybody have questions?
Is it your view that Sarah is viewed as a traitor?
Well, the point of the project wasn't really to evaluate whether or not what the motivations were, because a lot of people have tried to figure out why she did what she did, and they haven't really uncovered anything that hasn't already been found. So I wrote the paper agreeing with the notion that Sarah did betray her people, but Jim Gardner, who was one of the scholars who was helping us throughout the project, sort of understands Sarah through what he calls a traitor-heroine complex. So she betrayed her people, but she also made an effort to advocate on their behalf, even though at that point they didn't really want her as their advocate. So it's a really sort of problematic trade-off. So.
Thank you very much.